Salutations everyone! World of Warcraft Shadowlands was announced weeks ago, and while we weren't told a whole lot, it is always fun to speculate on who the spotlight will shine on next, and what characters we might meet later on within the expansion. In Battle for Azeroth, the characters who were focused on the most were given the Heroes of Azeroth titles. And they were Anduin, Sylvanas, though not really a hero, Vol'jin, Jaina, Thrall, and Barak Sarfang. And while yes, some of those characters were focused on more than others, they were still the most focused on within the expansion. In today's video, I'll be talking about characters who I want to focus on within the Shadowlands. This will most likely be based on my own personal preferences, but also based on who's been confirmed already. There are some spoilers that were announced at BlizzCon and in interviews, so be warned. But with that all being said, let's get started. One of the similarities between Shadowlands and Wrath of the Lich King is supposedly the focus on the MM Blade, or rather, the Death Knights. This was sort of shown with the new addition to Shadowlands expansion of giving the allied races and Pandaren the option to become Death Knights, just before Sylvanas defeats Bolvar and shatters the Veil. And who better to go with us and even possibly guide us through the Shadowlands than the Four Horsemen? Originally one of the strongest units of elite Death Knights crafted by Calia himself, they're now comprised of different people since the deaths of the originals. This includes Darian Mograine, the leader of the Ebon Blade and the Four Horsemen. He died the first time at Light's Hope Chapel, giving his own life to save others through the Ashbringer piercing his chest and killing himself, but also hundreds of Scourge. He was then raised by Kel'Thuzad and later became the High Lord of the Scourge. After some complications between the Ebon Blade and the Lich King, Darian would swear himself and his order to bring justice to Arthas, alongside Tirion Fordring. Once they had succeeded, a new Lich King was crowned by Tirion, and when the Legion had returned, this new Lich King called the Death Knights to aid him in ensuring Azeroth would not fall to the Burning Shadow. A new Four Horsemen will be raised by the Death Lord. General Nazgrim, a loyal orc soldier who never faltered in his loyalty to Warchief Hellscream, despite having some doubts. He died during the Siege of Orgrimmar, believing the rebels will make a new prosperous era for the Horde. King Trollbane, once the warrior king of Stromgarde and a founder of the Alliance, he was slain by his son who wished to take the place of leadership. Sally Whitemane, the High Inquisitor and once a leader of the Scarlet Crusade, she had fallen numerous times, but due to her strong faith and power of resurrection, she kept returning. It was through Lillian Voss that this process had stopped, until now. Lastly, Darian Mograine. Originally the goal was to have Tirion Fordring, who had fallen at the Broken Shore, to be the leader and final rider of the Four Horsemen. However, the light protecting Tyrion's body would not allow this, and Darian ultimately died a second time because of this. He was raised as the new leader of the Four Horsemen thereafter. I think it would be amazing to have each of these characters go with us in each of the realms that we encounter. Sort of have them as our main crew like in Mists of Pandaria's days, and maybe have each one go through an arc of sorts in each one of these zones. Although Ardenweald is incredibly difficult to choose for one of these guys. You could especially focus on more of their actions in life with each of these zones. Perhaps have Nazgrim meet Garrosh. Whitemane and Darian could meet Reynault or even Alexandros. Trollbane could meet his forebears or even his son. The list goes on. I think it'd be a great time to focus on every single one of the Four Horsemen and the Ebon Blade within the Shadowlands. This really should be the time for Death Knights to shine once again, very similar to how the Illithari did in Legion. Daughter and supposedly the only child of the late King Rastakhan, Talanji had become queen and ruler of the Zandalari after her father's demise during the Fourth War when the Alliance besieged their city of Dazar Lor. When Rastakhan died, his bargain that he didn't tell Talanji about transferred over to her. The bargain being the royal family of the Zandalari would serve Bwonsamdi both in life and death forever. Following the pattern of characters from the previous expansion carrying over to the next, I highly believe Queen Talanji will have some form of role within the Shadowlands. This could follow up with her family's deal with Bwonsamdi trying to get out of it somehow. As clearly shown with Rastakhan, it was a pretty one-sided deal that really only benefited Bwonsamdi. The power that Bwonsamdi offered was not truly worth it. This could mean her reuniting with Rastakhan and possibly her ancestors, as they're not exactly in the care of Razan anymore, and I would imagine their spirits would go to the other side to serve Bwonsamdi, like Rastakhan probably is. Or it could focus more on the mystery behind who Bwonsamdi's boss is. We know that the other side, Bwonsamdi's own little dimension for the deceased, is a dungeon for the Shadowlands. This could mean either Bwonsamdi is our enemy, and through killing him or defeating him it'll free Talanji, or his domain is taken by his master, which could really be anyone. Bwonsamdi was pretty okay with the balance of life and death still being a factor, and of course he relishes about death. But Sylvanas, she doesn't really care about the balance. So it could be that Bwonsamdi isn't such a bad dude after all, with that in mind. Perhaps he makes another bargain with Talanji where if she helps him free himself from being lorded by somebody, he'll break the bargain her father made with him. There's also the chance they could focus on her relationship with Vol'jin, whose spirit seems to be connected to her. And the last we saw of Vol'jin, he went back to the Shadowlands to uncover more of what's going on. So perhaps we'll have a buddy cop situation with Talanji and Vol'jin. The Regent Lord of the Sin'dorei people of Silvermoon City, Lor'themar took over the leadership of his people with Prince Kael'thas's absence in Outlands, and has retained that role since his prince's death. Prior to this, he was Sylvanas Windrunner's second-in-command prior to her death and resurrection as the Banshee Queen. He heavily respected her and considered her a friend. After Sylvanas' dismountment of the Horde and the killing of Varrock Sarfang, Lor'themar vowed he and his Farstriders would find both Sylvanas and Nathanos and bring the two to justice. This could be Lor'themar's way into the Shadowlands as one of the many there to bring justice to Sylvanas, who is the very reason we are, of course, dealing with the rampant Scourge threat and the broken skies with the Shadowlands realm right above it. And like so many others, he will be trapped within the Maw, and that's apparently where everyone goes for a time. After he escapes the Maw, which I imagine will be much later after arriving to the Shadowlands, it would be a perfect time to allow him to interact with Prince Kael'thas, who we know has a huge story within Ravendreth. This could include forgiving the prince or finally getting the time to relent on him for his actions. It'd be a great way to show how much Kael'thas has evolved since his time in Ravendreth, which I imagine is to help redeem the character, as is the very purpose of the realm. It'd be interesting to see Kael's reaction to how the Blood Elves have been doing since his death and their time within the Horde. I do think Lor'themar will have some form of interaction with Prince Kael. It would be a very large missed opportunity if they didn't have some kind of Sin'dorei or High Elf to interact with the former Prince of the Blood Elves. And of course, I don't think Lor'themar will forget about his objective to bring the Dark Lady to justice. I don't think he'll be the one to do it, but I do think he'll have a hand in it. Daughter to High Lord Bolvar Fordragon, raised in Kultiris by a Kultiran veteran of the First Wars named Cyrus. Talia became a very prominent as a character when Jaina Proudmoore returned home and quickly climbed up the ranks of the Kultiran Navy, even saving former Lord Admiral Catherine's life. Talia has a lot of curiosity regarding what happened to her father. Most of the world was told that Bolvar Fordragon and the Lich King died together. This is of course not true and was something Tyrion made nearly everyone swear to keep a secret. But with Bolvar out and about and no longer the Lich King, obviously this lie is going to break. I do think Talia will want to see her father regardless of what he has become, One of the things they said regarding Bolvar is they want to focus on how much is actually left of Bolvar and the Lich King. An interesting statement since the helm was ripped from him and then shattered. So I think it's safe to say Talia will play some role in Shadowlands, likely tagging along with her father. Eldest sister of Calia Menethil and the only remaining crown of Lor'themar still active, she was revealed to have been kept safe by the former Archbishop Alon's Fall, who brought her into the ways of the priest. She later attended a massive meeting whom she helped devise with King Anduin and the Desolate Council. This led to countless forsaken deaths at the hands of Sylvanas Windrunner, who also claimed Calia's own life. However, she would be saved thanks to the efforts of the Light and became something more because of it. She supposedly made a new life with Derek and has been helping the abandoned Dark Rangers cope with their new undead lives. She has not yet received the Throne of Lor'themar and Queenship of the Forsaken. Considering they gave her so much focus within Battle for Azeroth and did little with it, it makes me think they'll do something with her in Shadowlands. I imagine her role of importance to the Naru is about to finally show, as for some reason the Light now wants a piece of that action with death, and that could mean she's going to help them breach the Shadowlands. Alternatively, she could join the fight to get payback with Sylvanas initially, but it later becomes more of a reunion of sorts, perhaps with her father, Calia Menethil, or even her younger brother, Arthas, who is likely suffering the maw for the deeds he did. I'm not entirely sure what they'll do with Calia, but she is someone that they should definitely use more of. One of the first 5 paladins of the Order of the Silver Hand, Supreme Commander of the Alliance after the fall of Lothar, Turalyon led the Alliance into Draenor to end the threat once and for all. But because of this, he, his troops, and his wife Illyria were trapped on what would soon become Outlands. But a Lightforged Dreadlord would save them from their fate, and would lead them to the Light Mother Zira. Afterwards, Turalyon too would become Lightforged and be made the High Exarch of the Army of the Light, in their war against the Legion. Once that war had ended and Zira was shattered by the Betrayer, he would rejoin the Alliance and fight in the Fourth War. Now, for me, Turalyon was most interesting when he questioned his faith in the Light, and I think Bastion would make for a perfect second go at his doubts. Within Bastion lies his friend Uther the Lightbringer, and potentially the other first 5 paladins like Tyrion Fordring. But Bastion is a place of heavy devotion, where you give up your memories, name, and even body for the sake of ascension. For some, their past life might have not been worth it, and they can make this sacrifice. But for most, having doubts about losing what made you, well, you, would not be an easy choice, and I would love it to be explored with Turalyon putting doubts in these ideas, especially if, say, Uther was about to go through this process. I also think this would be a great opportunity for Turalyon to reunite with his fellow Order of the Silver Hand and possibly even Lothar, his former mentor, whose sword Turalyon still carries. Plus, if his wife is going, I imagine he would stick along. And speaking of his wife, Illyria Windrunner and Varisa Windrunner, eldest and youngest to Sylvanas Windrunner. Illyria, once a proud and powerful ranger of Quel'Thalas, had gone with her husband Turalyon to Outlands after the first 2 wars, and was lost for years in the Twisting Nether. She devoted her studies to the Void and later became the leader and teacher of the Void Elves. Varisa, leader of the Silver Covenant, and widow to her deceased husband Ronan. Varisa increasingly became more involved after her husband's death, and against the Horde. With Sylvanas being the one to cause so much misery and destruction, and now plotting within the Shadowlands, it would make a lot of sense for the 2 sisters to be there to stop her once and for all, and join the hunt for her in the Shadowlands. Varisa could maybe reunite with her husband in their travels, while Illyria could be a plot point for the Void to possibly try and invade the Shadowlands through her. I do think that it would be a very poetic and even sad if the two sisters witnessed or were even there for when or if Sylvanas does die. Okay, so before I list my final pick for who I would like to see in Shadowlands, I have a single honorable mention I want to talk on here before we begin. And yes, I honestly could include so many honorable mentions here, but hey, if this video takes off, I can always do a part 2. Jaina Proudmoore has many names and titles throughout the years, but she has definitely more losses than titles. There's Arthas Menethil, her former lover she could reunite with. There is her father, Dalen Proudmoore, whom she recently forgave. There's her former student, Kindi, whom she lost in the bombing of Theramore. And there is Antonidas, her teacher and mentor, who died to the blade of Arthas Menethil. Ultimately, she could reunite with so many, but I think her arc is done, as she has already learned her lessons of both forgiving and letting go of the past. I don't think it's truly necessary for her to join us in Shadowlands. However, if it happens, and I will not complain, as I would love a reunion between her and Arthas, and so many others. That's right, Mr. Thumbnail himself. Thrall was once Warchief, once World Shaman, and currently has a seat on the Horde Council, representing the Orcs. Thrall had been a slave most of his life, due to the deaths of his mother Draka and his father Duilio, but was saved thanks to a human friend Taretha, who gave him freedom which costed her her very life. He had been taught in the ways of the Orcs by Grom Hellscream and Ogrim Doomhammer. Thrall became one of the first new shamans of his people under the guidance of Drekthar. Thrall would succeed his mentor Ogrim as Warchief on his friend's dying request, bearing both his hammer and armor thereafter. He later left the Eastern Kingdoms behind him for a new life promised to him by an oracle, and so sailed to Kalimdor, guided by his Tauren friend and later advisor, Karen Bloodhoof. But the past followed them to the western continent, as Thrall's friend Grom would be twisted by the very blood that cursed the Orcs, but with his dying act, he freed the Orcish people from the Legion forever. And after successfully banding together with the Alliance and Night Elves along the slopes of Mount Hyjal, a lasting peace became possible for a time. But war struck out again and again, and the world took quite a few hits in the process. Along with many of Thrall's friends and allies, ones he had even called his brothers. Thrall has lost a lot of friends over the years. Even when an infant, he had lost both his parents. Now I do think Thrall would once again answer the call to bring Sylvanas to justice, not because he made the monster this time, but rather for his late friend Varrock, who now rots in the maw. This would not only allow Thrall to reunite with so many of his friends and mentors, but most importantly, someone they mention in Maldraxxus, Draka, his mother. In Warlords of Draenor, they focused a bit on Thrall's interaction with his parents, but they really had no honest connection to that Thrall, aside from, of course, liking the guy for helping out against the Iron Horde. But Draka being in Maldraxxus is a huge statement, and it would be a waste not to have the two interact at some point. That's just begging for one of Taron Gregory's cinematics, where child and parent hug it out and have some feels. It could explore so many avenues of how Draka feels about her son and learning what happened after their assassination. I'd especially love to see her take on the Horde, being so different from how it was in her day. I do hope there's a chance for dear old dad to show up too, but I have a feeling Duilio might not have fared so well in Maldraxxus, or wherever he may have ended up. On a side note, I would love it if Thrall, Drenosh, and Broxagar teamed up to free Varrock Sarfang from the Maw. Now that would be a badass family reunion too. Another thing that they could do is allow Garrosh and Thrall to at last put water under the bridge. I think having Thrall and Garrosh interact one final time on a positive note would be a good way to end their arcs together. I love their duel, and it was very telling, but I think this could be a good way to allow Thrall to wield the elements again, and also make things good with Garrosh in a nice little bow. Thrall just has way too many friends and characters who are dead to not bring this guy along into the Shadowlands, where he can get some penance and probably some love too. But those are just my ideas for who they could focus on, or at least bring into the Shadowlands. I honestly hope that some of these guys show up at some point, as many would be missed opportunities with characters who are long dead to never get interacted with. I think that's the truest of grabs with Shadowlands for me. I want to have the living and the dead getting to say their goodbyes, as that's not something most get to do. But what do you guys think of my choices? Is there someone you want to go with us to the Shadowlands? Is there somebody you really want to interact with who's living and who's dead? Let me know down below. Go ahead and give this a like, give it a share, and well, if you didn't like it, I suppose give it a dislike, I guess. Ring that blessed bell if you want to get notified about this channel. Come and join us on the Discord, we'd love to have you for more discussions. Maybe follow me on Twitter to hear more often, join me on Twitch to see me play the video games, Reforge is probably soon so keep an eye out for that, or maybe support me on Patreon, a little help goes a long way and I greatly appreciate it. All of those in the description down below, as well as some other things. But until next time, my friends, these videos ain't for kids. See ya!